Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Daniel Ashford's wedding was the kind the city talked about for months before and long after the final glass of champagne was drained. The Ashford estate glittered beneath chandeliers imported from Europe, and the air carried the sound of soft violins and polite laughter from powerful guests who came not just to witness a union, but to reaffirm alliances. Daniel stood at the center of it all, tall and composed in his tailored suit, his smile practiced yet sincere. To the world, he was a fortunate man marrying the elegant Miranda Cole, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her flawless social grace. She moved through the guests like royalty, greeting each one with warmth that felt genuine enough to deceive even the most suspicious observer. Daniel believed, at least on that day, that he had found a partner who loved him beyond his wealth. He ignored the faint unease in his chest, the quiet voice reminding him how quickly Miranda had adapted to luxury, how naturally she fit into excess, as though she'd been rehearsing for it all her life. Mr. Raymond Ashford, Daniel's father, watched the ceremony from a distance, his expression unreadable. Unlike his son, Raymond had built his fortune from nothing, scraping through hardship and betrayal to become one of the most feared and respected businessmen in the country. He had seen people smile with knives behind their teeth, and something about Miranda unsettled him. It was not what she said, but what she never said, never once asked about family values, never speaking of sacrifice or growth, only of destinations, investments, and appearances. Raymond hugged his son after the vows, his voice calm but heavy with meaning as he whispered advice about patience and observation. Daniel laughed it off, believing his father was simply being overprotective. He did not yet understand that Raymond's silence was not approval, but restraint. As night fell and fireworks exploded above the estate, Miranda rested her hand possessively on Daniel's arm, smiling for cameras and guests alike. In her eyes, reflected briefly in a mirror as she passed the grand hallway, there was no love, only calculation. The Ashford name was finally hers, and with it came access to wealth she believed she deserved. In that moment, she silently promised herself that whatever sacrifices were required to secure her future, she would make them without hesitation. What she did not know was that the Ashfords were not a family that tolerated deception, and the marriage she saw as a conquest would soon become the stage for her undoing. The weeks following the wedding revealed a growing divide that Daniel struggled to name, but felt deeply. Miranda filled the mansion with new furniture, expensive art, and staff she replaced while consulting him, dismissing long-serving employees with cold efficiency. She laughed it off when Daniel questioned her decisions, brushing his concerns aside as inexperience. To her, the mansion was no longer a home but a symbol, one that needed to be reshaped to reflect her taste and authority. Daniel tried to adjust, convincing himself that marriage required compromise, yet every compromise seemed to demand only a surrender. He began working longer hours, hoping distance would soften the tension, unaware that his absence only gave Miranda more freedom. Raymond Ashford visited unannounced one afternoon, walking through the mansion with the careful eyes of a man assessing damage after a storm. He noticed how the staff avoided Miranda, how fear followed her presence like a shadow. When he asked for water, she barely acknowledged him, gesturing impatiently for a maid to handle it. That moment settled something in Raymond's mind. Respect, he believed, was revealed in how one treated those with nothing to offer. That evening, he sat with Daniel in the study, speaking slowly about character and patience, about how wealth attracted both loyalty and predators. Daniel listened conflicted, torn between loyalty to his wife and trust in his father's instincts. Later that night, Raymond made a decision that would alter all their lives. He would test Miranda, not with confrontation, but with exposure. He would strip himself of status and wealth, and see who she truly was when no benefit remained. The plan shocked Daniel when it was revealed, but something in his father's certainty silenced his objections. Raymond did not want revenge or validation. He wanted truth, and truth, he knew, had a way of surfacing when masks were removed. Raymond Ashford became invisible the moment he put on worn clothes and dark glasses. Bent slightly, leaning on a cane, he positioned himself outside the gates of Daniel's mansion before dawn, his presence dismissed by passing cars and hurried pedestrians. The guards, unaware of his identity, allowed him to remain at a distance, assuming he would soon move on. Raymond stayed. He listened, he watched, and he waited. When Miranda exited the mansion later that morning, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, she recoiled at the sight of him, her face twisted in disgust as though poverty itself offended her. She ordered the guards to remove him, her voice sharp and impatient. When Raymond calmly asked for water, her response was a laugh filled with contempt. She accused him of bringing bad luck, of ruining the image of her home. Each word struck harder than any blow, but Raymond endured it silently, committing every insult to memory. From a balcony above, Daniel watched, his chest tightening as he witnessed his wife's cruelty unfold without restraint. The woman who smiled at charity galas and spoke of compassion showed none when she believed no one important was watching. Day after day, Raymond returned, each encounter revealing new depths of Miranda's disdain. She kicked his cane aside once when he dropped it, mocking his blindness, telling him to find another place to beg. Daniel confronted her gently after the third day, disturbed by what he had seen. Miranda responded with practiced innocence, accusing him of being naive and claiming beggars were manipulators. Her words created a fracture in Daniel's heart, one that widened with every passing day. By the fourth day, the blind beggar had become a fixture at the gate, and Miranda's irritation turned into cruelty. She poured leftover drinks onto ground near him, telling him that was all he deserved. When a maid attempted to secretly give Raymond food, Miranda fired her on the spot. Daniel's silence became heavier, his love battling disbelief. He wanted to believe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, something that could reconcile the woman he married with the woman he now observed. Raymond, meanwhile, experienced a pain deeper than humiliation. It was a pain of knowing that the woman entrusted with his son's heart lacked even basic humanity. Yet he remained steadfast, reminding himself that truth required endurance. Each insult was a piece of evidence, each act of cruelty another nail sealing Miranda's fate. He saw how she preened before visitors, yet transformed the moment she thought herself unseen. The contrast was damning. That evening, Raymond returned home quietly, removing his disguise and sitting alone in his study. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about Miranda, but about how deeply this betrayal would wound Daniel. He resolved to see the test through, no matter the cost, because partial truth will be more dangerous than ignorance. On the sixth day, something unexpected happened. As Raymond sat at the gate, he heard hurried footsteps and hushed voices. A man approached, nervous, glancing around before stopping just out of sight. With him was a young boy, no older than 7, clutching his hand. When Miranda appeared, her composure shattered. Her voice dropped, her body tense as she demanded to know why they were there. The boy ran to her, calling her mommy. The word struck Raymond like a thunderclap. He listened as fragments of truth spilled out, arguments about money, about delays, about promises Miranda had made. The man, Victor Cole, spoke with frustration, reminding her of their plans and of the child she was neglecting. Miranda silenced him with threats, shoving money into his hand and ordering him never to return. Raymond's hands trembled as realization set in. The betrayal went far beyond greed. It was calculated, long-term, and devastating. From the balcony, Daniel witnessed a scene too late to hear the words, but enough to see the fear on Miranda's face and the intimacy she tried desperately to hide. That night, the foundation of his marriage cracked beyond repair. Daniel confronted his father that night, shaken and confused. Raymond revealed everything, the disguise, the cruelty, the child. The truth crashed into Daniel like a tidal wave, leaving him breathless. Together, they decided to dig deeper, quietly hiring investigators to uncover the full extent of Miranda's deception. What they found was worse than imagined. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, millions siphoned from Daniel's company. Each discovery stripped away another layer of denial. Daniel grieved not only the betrayal, but the man he had been before it. Raymond remained steady, reminding him that survival required clarity, not emotion. They planned carefully, knowing exposure would be most powerful when public. Miranda sensed a shift but misread it as victory. She continued spending lavishly, confident her secrets were safe. She mocked Daniel's seriousness, accusing him of growing distant. Behind her back, evidence piled higher. Phone records, bank transfers, and witness statements painted a picture of a woman who had turned marriage into a business transaction. Daniel struggled to maintain normalcy, his heartbreak hidden behind polite smiles. Each night, he lay awake replaying memories, searching for authenticity that now felt counterfeit. Raymond watched his son endure in silence, knowing the confrontation would soon bring both relief and pain. Daniel announced a grand birthday celebration, inviting business partners, politicians, and family friends. Miranda was delighted, seeing another opportunity to shine. She had no idea the event was a carefully constructed trap. Every detail was planned, every witness accounted for. Raymond prepared his final reveal, his heart heavy but resolute. He would reclaim not just his dignity, but his son's future. The night of the party arrived, and the mansion glowed with luxury. Midway through the celebration, Daniel took the microphone. His voice was calm, controlled, as he began telling a story about trust, family, and betrayal. Guests listened, confused, as Raymond stepped forward, no disguise now. He spoke of a blind beggar, of cruelty, of a woman who mistreated him without mercy. Miranda's face drained of color as recognition dawned. Before she could speak, Victor and young Lucas were brought forward. The truth exploded in the room, silencing every whisper. Evidence was displayed, accounts exposed, lies dismantled. Miranda collapsed under the weight of her own deception, screaming denials no one believed. Security escorted her out as cameras flashed, capturing the end of her carefully crafted illusion. Daniel stood beside his father, devastated but free. The ashes of betrayal still burned, but within them lay the promise of renewal. The morning after the party arrived without mercy for Miranda Cole. News of her exposure spread faster than the dawn, splashed across blogs, business journals, and whispered conversations in elite circles that once welcomed her warmly. She awoke in a small hotel room, far removed from the mansion she had claimed as her kingdom, her head pounding not just from exhaustion but from the collapse of the life she had carefully constructed. For the first time in years, mirrors reflected something she could not manipulate: fear. Her phone buzzed endlessly with missed calls, not concern, but accusation. Banks froze accounts. Former allies distanced themselves, and lawyers demanded explanations she could no longer fabricate. The silence that followed was louder than any insult she had ever hurled at others. Daniel Ashford, meanwhile, walked through the mansion like a stranger revisiting a place filled with ghosts. Every room carried echoes of conversations that now felt false, laughter that rang hollow in hindsight. Staff members moved quietly around him, unsure whether to speak or remain invisible. He felt both exposed and relieved, stripped of illusion but burdened by truth. Raymond stayed close, offering presence rather than words, understanding that grief did not require advice. Daniel struggled with anger, not just toward Miranda, but toward himself for missing signs that now seemed obvious. The betrayal had not only taken his trust, it had shaken his confidence in his own judgment. As the day unfolded, legal teams arrived, documents spread across long tables where once meals were shared. Daniel signed papers with a steady hand, determined to reclaim what had been stolen, not out of revenge, but necessity. He realized that healing would not be immediate, and closure would not arrive neatly packaged. Yet beneath the exhaustion and humiliation, something unexpected stirred: resolve. The truth, painful as it was, had freed him from a lie he no longer had to sustain. Lucas Cole sat quietly beside his father in a modest apartment far from the city's glittering skyline, his small hands folded as though trying to make himself invisible. He did not understand the chaos unfolding around him, only that his mother had disappeared abruptly and his father was suddenly burdened with fear. Victor Cole watched his son with guilt gnawing at his chest, realizing too late the cost of complicity. He had convinced himself that Miranda's actions were temporary, that the wealth she chased would one day secure their future. Instead, it had destroyed it. When social services reached out, Victor feared losing Lucas altogether, a punishment that felt cruel but deserved. Daniel insisted on meeting the child privately, against the advice of his legal team. When Lucas stood before him, eyes wide and cautious, Daniel felt no anger, only sadness. The boy was innocent, a pawn in a game designed by adults blinded by greed. Daniel spoke gently, assuring Lucas that none of this was his fault, that the world had not turned against him. Raymond observed quietly, pride swelling in his chest. This was the measure of the man his son had become, capable of compassion even in betrayal. That meeting marked a turning point. Daniel arranged support for Lucas through legal channels, ensuring the child would not suffer further because of his mother's crimes. It was not forgiveness he offered Miranda through this act, but humanity. In doing so, Daniel reclaimed something she had tried to steal: his moral center. Rebuilding the company proved more difficult than Daniel anticipated. Miranda's manipulations had gone deeper than financial theft. She had eroded trust within the organization. Executives questioned leadership. Partners hesitated, and investors demanded reassurance. Daniel stood before them not as a wounded husband, but as a leader determined to restore integrity. He addressed the scandal directly, refusing to hide behind excuses or spin. His transparency surprised many, and slowly, confidence began to return. Raymond worked beside him, offering guidance without control. He let Daniel make decisions, even mistakes, knowing growth required ownership. Together, they audited systems, restructured departments, and dismissed those who had knowingly assisted Miranda's schemes. Each correction felt like a stitch closing a wound, painful but necessary. Daniel found solace in work, not as an escape, but as a way to rebuild identity. Late one evening, while sorting through old files, Daniel stumbled upon a photograph from his university days. In it stood Naomi Brooks, smiling effortlessly, untouched by the weight of ambition that later defined his life. The memory stirred something warm and unexpected, a reminder of a time when connections were genuine, unmeasured by wealth. He hesitated, unsure whether reaching out was wise, but the thought lingered, quietly hopeful. Naomi Brooks was surprised when Daniel reached out after so many years. Their reunion took place in a small cafe far, removed from boardrooms and headlines. She greeted him without awe or judgment, asking about his well-being rather than his fortune. That simplicity disarmed him. Conversation flowed easily, touching on shared memories, laughter softening wounds Daniel thought permanent. Naomi listened, not to respond, but to understand. As weeks passed, their meetings became more frequent. Naomi never asked about Miranda, never pressed into painful territory unless Daniel offered himself. Her presence felt grounding, reminding him that value did not have to be earned through suffering. Raymond noticed a change in his son, the lighter steps, the return of laughter. He said nothing, choosing trust over interference. For the first time since the scandal, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future not defined by betrayal. It frightened him as much as it excited him, but he recognized fear as proof that hope had returned. Miranda's attempts to regain control failed spectacularly. Court appearances replaced galas, and the cameras she once welcomed now captured her unraveling. Victor testified against her, driven by the need to protect his son and himself. Friends vanished, calls went unanswered, and luxury turned into isolation. She blamed everyone but herself, unable to confront the truth that greed had hollowed her from within. Sentencing arrived quietly, without drama. Miranda sat alone as consequences were read aloud, financial penalties, public disgrace, and a future stripped of illusion. For the first time, she felt what she had inflicted on others, powerlessness. Raymond and Daniel took a rare trip together, away from business and city noise. By the sea, conversations unfolded naturally about mistakes, pride, love, and loss. Raymond admitted his own failures as a father. Times he chose strength over tenderness. Daniel listened, understanding replacing resentment. Healing, he realized, was not erasing pain, but learning from it. Daniel faced a choice, not of wealth or power, but of vulnerability. Opening his heart again meant risking pain. Naomi never pressured him, offering companionship without expectation. In her patience, Daniel found courage. He chose honesty, sharing his fears openly for the first time. What grew between Daniel and Naomi was quiet but profound. There were no grand gestures, only consistency, respect, and shared silence. Daniel learned that love did not need to dazzle to be real. It needed to endure. Daniel restructured the company's philanthropic arm, focusing on dignity rather than display. Programs were built to empower, not perform. Raymond watched with pride as Daniel reshaped the Ashford legacy into something more meaningful than wealth. Standing on the balcony where he once watched cruelty unfold, Daniel felt peace settle within him. The past no longer haunted him. It informed him. Naomi stood beside him, hand in his, as the future stretched open, uncertain, honest, and free. For the first time, Daniel Ashford knew that true wealth was not inherited, stolen, or displayed. It was earned through integrity, compassion, and the courage to choose again. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.